So Neil,
Yeah.
I appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today, and I enjoyed speaking with you briefly last week at our Gen AI networking session. Hopefully you got to meet a few people there. But my objective today, Neil, is to speak to you about a topic that you mentioned that has my attention. I think you call it near futurism. So if we could talk about that, I think that might be interesting. I'm sure, in fact, I'm confident it will be. First of all, why don't you define that? We're all somewhat familiar with futurism and what futurists do and think about. Can you explain near futurism?
Sure. Yeah. So as you said, we think we know, what futurists do. Essentially, I have huge respect for people whose profession, chosen profession is strategic foresight, prognostication, like really doing evidence and research-based prediction of what's coming further into the future, right? Because these kinds of efforts are really important for framing, large scale efforts, say around dealing with climate change or population shift or global migration, even energy usage, population expansion, shrinkage, et cetera. That scale of thing, that's not what I do. I've started using the term a couple of years ago, near futurism, or call myself a near futurist, because I'm, as a technologist by training, software engineer, computer science, tech strategist, I'm really focused on getting things built and what can be built today with what exists in terms of technology, in terms of best practices, and so on. So near futurism is really about connecting what's possible with what's practical today. And I happen to be an enthusiast for emerging technology. And so, of course, right now, like all of us, I'm really looking a lot at AI. I've had an interest in AR and VR and spatial computing for a number of years. These two territories, and I kind of lump AR and VR and spatial computing all together. We can talk about that a little bit, and AI, of course. And blockchain is probably somewhere in there, lurking in the background. I think it's going to make a comeback, or there's going to be another wave of everything there. But these are all technologies and domains of technological expertise that are really relevant in the near future. And by near future, I mean the coming months or even the next couple of years. And in order to be relevant, these technologies have to be mature enough to be put into practice today. So that's what I do. When I work with companies that hire me to help them understand what can be built now and sort of plan out a 2 to 3 year roadmap, it's really based on what's mature enough now, connecting the possible with the practical.
So there's science and there's applied science. And what I like about what you're mentioning is that you're talking about things that can be built. We could argue that futurists get off the hook, right? They just get to predict and prognosticate, and they don't have to build anything. And in fact, most people don't even come back in 10 years to see how many of them were true, of their predictions were true. I also believe, interestingly enough, I believe that maybe the world has caught up to you, because I personally believe that the future, as we tend to describe it, the future as we describe it today is different than we did maybe 20, 30 years ago. So if you look at pieces that were written about the future, even in the 70s, 80s, the future was like 30, 40, 50 years away. Is it right? Do you agree? My sense is, and maybe just because you and I are in the game, right? But the majority of my kind of discussions about the future, however you define it, lately have been 2024, 2025.
It's true. It's true. I think you and I are both old enough to remember that when the future, when we were kids, right? The future was, maybe the year 2000, we're going to have rocket packs, we're going to have drones, we're going to have space travel, various other kinds of really aspirational things. And to your point, it was decades out. And that was the future that people talked about. And yes, I rarely hear people talking about the distant future at this point, again, except for futurists that really look at, climate scientists, for example, are talking about decades out, right? Or even a century out. People that look at humanity level movements and trends, migration and otherwise, right, are looking at decades out. But from a technology perspective, you'd be forgiven for believing that there's just no point in looking beyond the next few years. Before COVID, well before this current huge surge in AI in capabilities and interest, I talked about near futurism as being like the next 3 to 5 years. That's a good time frame for thinking about what can emerge, because, in the 10, 20 years leading up to COVID, it felt like things didn't, I mean, they were changing a lot more rapidly than when we were kids, but still felt like you could predict 3 to 5 years out. And
So
then
I,
the
yeah, go
pandemic really surprised us, right? Because although Bill Gates and others, in retrospect, they clearly had been talking about pandemic preparedness, most of us weren't thinking about it, right? So it kind of came out of nowhere, blindsided most of us. And then in some ways, again, AI similarly, even though it's been uh, in development as a sort of realm of technology for many decades, even going back to the 60s, and there's been a lot of progress in recent years. It wasn't until Midjourney and Dolly and ChatGPT were available for everyday people to get their hands on and use that people realized, holy shit, like this is actually
yeah.
a huge advance. And it also felt like it kind of came out of nowhere, right? These levels of capabilities. So yes, I mean, all of that is just adding a little color to my agreement with you that it feels like there's not a huge value really in predicting beyond the coming months. And that said, the best we can do is look at the current trajectories of each of these technologies closely enough, right? And with AI, there's enough public conversation now. I mean, just today, as we speak, the Biden-Harris administration just launched this new executive order, which, if you haven't read it, whoever's listening, definitely go check it out. I mean, the summary is essentially it's about risk mitigation in order to safely experience the benefits of AI as a society, right? Certainly from the US perspective. All that is to say, AI has been moving really rapidly, but we also feel like collectively we have a handle on the things that we need to understand about it and engage publicly around in order to make the best use of it. So we can do near future kinds of work around AI. Similarly with spatial computing and AR and VR, I think there's enough clarity there.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree 100%. I was speaking with some people last week about generative AI, and I know that you're very comfortable there as well as other technologies, and I want to get to that in a moment. But the bigger difference, as I see it, the majority of the kind of tech waves that I've experienced in my career were typically big, complex, expensive, and therefore top down. Like they started with the big companies and they worked their way down to the mid-market. Then they eventually worked their way down to, in almost pretty much every scenario. This Gen AI wave is the opposite. It's really good. It's either cheap or free, and it's bottoms up. So the majority of the action, I mean, if you looked around that room at our gathering last week, the majority of the action are startups and solopreneurs. So as I look at it, this is grassroots. So it's different for so many reasons, more that we want to maybe cover now. But from all the intel that I have is the majority of the activity it will continue to be startups and small companies. It will work its way up to mid-market companies. And while many, not all, but many of the Global 2000 are beginning to look at it, they're moving very slowly for several reasons, some of which are, in my opinion, justifiable, right? They have to be careful. There's compliance, there's risk, there's IP issues. And then other reasons are just typical big company, right? There's like bureaucracy and politics, et cetera. So when I think about like this upside down pyramid of this starting, the bulk of the action small and working its way up, and I think all the way up here are, Fortune 200 companies, which will maybe get there, get somewhere in 24 months or 36 months. And then if you place the government on top of that, you may or may not disagree with it. And regardless of where you are politically, the government, I saw that this morning, that news blast, and I'm looking at myself saying, my goodness, as slow moving as any government is, certainly ours, what are they going to do other than get in the way? That's my fear, right? Does it help or hurt us, regardless of how good their intentions are? You have any opinion on that? Was that comforting to you when you saw, maybe philosophically comforting, but if you think of companies now, we're in this race, this digital arms race, what are they going to do? Stall us, or just maybe just do nothing and just lip service? What do you think?
You know, great questions, Frank. I think we have to have this national conversation to the extent that we're able to. Um, if you think at the international level, sort of the three major players that come to mind when I think of regulatory engagement with technology or just investment in technology are really China, the US, and Europe, right? And so each of these nations or unions, in the case of the EU, are approaching AI particularly differently, right? I mean, China and the CCP there, I spent a lot of time in Hong Kong this year and working with a spatial computing startup that we can talk about. But I got quite a bit of a sense of how the CCP is thinking about this technology and done some reading and so on. But, China has the benefit, and maybe this is part of what you're getting at when you think about the risks of slowing down development of AI. China has the benefit of just at a central level, having legal access to any information about anybody's activity, private or otherwise, that they want to have, right? And if you know anything about AI and machine learning models and large language models, you know that training data is everything, right? And so being able to train your models on more data means higher capabilities, greater capabilities to these models, right? So in principle, it feels like China has a lead in because it has more data, can create more powerful models. At the same time, there is this huge just sort of distinction or non-overlap, right, between what's going on in China and Asia and what's going on in Europe and the US. So, and there's the whole great firewall, as people have called it over the years. China has its own internet, which is effectively true. So it may not actually wind up being as much of an advantage to China to have access to all that data as it would be if their internet was more open and connected to the rest of the world, right? So it's kind of a mixed bag there. In terms of the US it's more useful to compare what's happening in the US to what's happening in the EU, right? And the EU has been getting out ahead in terms of technology regulation for many years, with social media for sure, and now with AI. And so I think the US does need to participate at the level that the EU is participating in. It's a little bit late to the table here. Who knows what's going to happen with the next presidency in the US? I mean, things could radically change again. But I do think, this is a long way of saying, I think that I give a thumbs up to the Biden administration, taking this stance. I think they realize that competition is important. The ability to innovate is really important. And everything I've heard from Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, and others, indicate that they are enthusiastic, or at least very willing to engage in this public kind of conversation in good faith, right? They know, the US government is interested in the US continuing to be a great place to innovate. And I think they don't want to slow things down. They just want to, I like the way they positioned this in the executive order, which is we need to manage the risks so that we can receive the benefits. And nothing wrong with that. Well, the devil's in the details, right?
Yeah, we shall see. Well, listen, I hope you're right. I'm a little more pessimistic than you are, only just being a almost lifelong entrepreneur where speed is key. And my fear is that at some point the government may say, if you want to launch an AI business, it's the equivalent of getting a liquor license, and then here we go, right? So that would hurt us. But let's see. Let's be optimistic. Let's see how it plays out. Neil, I know I only have you for a limited amount of time, so I want to switch over to something specific. The company you mentioned, the startup you mentioned that you're working with, seems really intriguing. I'd love to know more about that technology with whatever you're able to share, and then a particular use case, target audience. So just like get to reality of here's what it is and here's what it does for who.
Sure. Absolutely. So Alki Labs is a tech startup, a spatial computing startup that I just spent 9 months working with. They're a client of mine, Reading Futures. I came on to help them commercialize a spatial computing platform and infrastructure that they've been building the last couple of years. And specifically, in terms of the who, specifically for retail audiences. Now, by retail here, I mean both uh, retail task management and retail ops, as it's called in the retail industry, how things get done to support stores at the operational level, and also for shoppers and shopper marketing. So, what does spatial computing have to do with those two domains of business? Well, the answer is when you're thinking about spatial computing, it's really fundamentally about the ability for devices to have a precise understanding of where they are in physical space, in three-dimensional space, relative to their surroundings or relative to other devices and people in those surroundings. And so when we looked at, okay, there's this technology, which verticals should be commercialized in, there was a lot of early traction with retail because retail is so much driven by where things are and where they should be in physical space, right? Everything from stocking and restocking shelves, if you're a retail associate, a store associate, to doing e-commerce order picking, where the store associate has a list of items on an order and has to go around the store finding where they are. Just general onboarding and training is very much about learning what goes where in the store. And so just having that information about what goes where in a 2D digital list style format tends to be error prone. Like lots of mistakes are made in terms of not being able to find things or putting them back in incorrect locations. And so being able to have devices and software that can tell where they are in space and guide store associates to placing or finding those items in the right place is really, really valuable. And this is applicable also to back of house, warehouses and so on as well that retailers use. And then on the shopper marketing side, we found there's a lot of enthusiasm on retailers' part to help shoppers find what they're looking for, particularly discounted items, items that are on sale, items that are expiring that might otherwise get thrown out. There's a lot of different dimensions to the value of being able to show shoppers where things are in the store and help guide them through the store. So, summary of all that is physical context is really, really important for digital information. And I say it that way in a slightly more abstract way, because spatial computing, as Tim Cook declared back in June when he announced the launch of this new headset, Apple's first purpose-built spatial computer, as they call it, that spatial computing is the third major era of computing after personal computing and mobile computing. And so he and Apple see spatial computing as being that big, having that much going forward, that much impact on how we get things done as personal and mobile computing have done, which of course is massive in each case, right? So we're seeing just the early stages of the value of spatial computing for retail, for how we get things done on a daily basis. And certainly, as Apple showed in that announcement in June, how we kick back and enjoy FaceTime calls with our friends, or video or TV entertainment on our couch, all kinds of other things as well. So I think 2024, certainly it's going to continue to be about AI overwhelmingly. And also, I think spatial computing and augmented reality are going to play a much bigger role. And AI is actually going to assist in making those technologies more useful as well.
Mm-hmm. So so it's a natural segue for me to address something else you brought up when you and I first met, which I haven't forgotten. You were talking about kind of this new relationship between physical and digital. Is that really a spin-off, or well, I don't know, maybe it was a drive or the genesis of the spatial, or how does that play out, and how would you describe it to those who are not familiar with this, as far as here's what it is and here's what this potentially means to different industries?
Sure. So yeah, I've used this language about the convergence of digital and physical for quite a few years. I think I started using that way of speaking about emerging tech possibilities back in 2015 or so, when I came on to Gensler, this big architecture and interior design firm, the brand studio in New York, to run their first digital experience design team there. And so architects and designers of physical spaces had this, clients were increasingly asking for how, some digital elements in the space. And sort of the default simple thing to do was put some black rectangles called TVs on the wall and put your digital there, right? The architects would say that, or the clients would say that, and so then the challenge was, well, what do we put there in these black rectangles? And so you got to create video or some other kind of content programming for those. But the thing that I got really excited about that connected me with Gensler in the first place was digital can be so much more than, just a TV on the wall. It can actually, we were already using all day long by 2015, most of us smartphones, right? We had these black slabs in our hands, and those black slabs already could know with the right apps, where we are. They could have personal information, first party data, as retailers or brands would say, about what I'm interested in. If I'm in a physical space, if it's a museum, like maybe it knows what kinds of art I'm interested in. If it's a store, it knows what my shopping list is, or whether I'm a vegan or a young hipster shopping for avocados and oat milk, or, a middle-aged family person shopping for the whole family for the week. So personal data, location-specific data, responding in personalized ways, right, to what's happening in the physical space. And so that's just one way of describing what digital and physical coming together mean, and what the implications are. And, increasingly, if we fast forward from 2015 to today, late 2023, we are slowly starting to see, COVID definitely put a damper on this for a couple of years, but starting to see owners of physical spaces like hotels, like restaurants, like retailers, like malls, use these kind of capabilities to present people with location-specific, layered digital information and even 3D objects, in their physical context that support the experience of that place. So does that make sense?
Oh, it totally does. So I want to squeeze in one more question, if I may. You mentioned that you have experience in AR, VR. I think you mentioned it early on, and you talked about Apple and the headset. So, I have to think you are, like me and many others, like very excited about what's to come. Granted, it's expensive, but we know, well, I say the price should come down, although with Apple historically it hasn't, but at least in general, hopefully they'll be able to come up with ways, maybe with the same model or different models, where it could get in more hands. But I'm just curious, when you think about kind of that new piece of hardware, a cool new piece of hardware, and things that we start to see, like I start to see what they're doing at concert venues. You see, even in New York, what they're doing with certain art exhibits. And it's really cool, right? And you just start to see not only this concept of immersive, but also, as you say, the spatial computing. You're starting to see this shift from just guys in the industry like you and I talking about this, this esoteric way. You're just starting to see people really do things. Any sense as to where that's going, likely, or maybe some additional use cases or things that, average person, average concert goer or museum visitor may start to see in the coming years?
Sure. Well, I think you're pointing to, in a museum context, right, for quite a few years now, right? Because mobile phones have been able to do relatively simple augmented reality for many, many years, for a decade, really, and by AR, again, I'm just referring to being able to place digital content or objects, two-dimensional, three-dimensional, in a physical context as seen through the phone's camera on the phone screen, right? So it appears like, if you're in a museum, say, you're looking at a painting, that painting is detected by the phone's camera and the software, and then there could be layered next to it, a description of, or even a video maybe of the artist when they were making this piece of work, right? Or a description of the background, or just the curator's point of view right, on this artwork. Again, this is an example of physical context for this information, right? That this information could be presented to you, background about a painting, say, anywhere, but it's really, really more valuable when it's presented in that physical context of the thing it refers to, this painting, right? Similarly, product information in a store, right? Much more valuable what its price is, if it's on special this week, like what the nutritional information is, or maybe like how it was made. Much more valuable information in the context of the product when you can make a decision about buying it, right? So you were asking specifically about Apple and the very expensive, yes, $3,500. It's Apple Vision Pro headset. There's enough both sort of leaked and supply chain indication, and also just, information that we can glean by looking at how Apple does product naming and product lines and what Tim Cook has said for years to come to the conclusion I'm about to articulate, which is pretty clear to me. This is the Apple Vision Pro, right? Apple uses the term Pro as a modifier. It's the top of the line in a particular product line, right? So we've got iPhones, we've got iPhone Pros, we've got iPhone Pro Max. The Pro has a specific meaning, same with MacBook Pro, iPad Pro, that while the features are different on different Pro models, it essentially means a higher end version, right, of the core thing. So Apple has recently bought, and over the years has bought, smaller technology companies. The most recent interesting one was they bought an AR eyeglass maker, or AR smart glasses maker, not that long ago. They probably bought multiple ones. But that's one indication that, in the very near future, I think in the coming 6 to 12 months, Apple will likely announce another, like just the Vision headset or the Vision Air or something like this. It's going to be a lower end price point. It might not be $500. It might be $1,500. I would guess it's probably more like 1,500 in the realm of like the Pro iPhones. But combining that with, as I mentioned, what Tim Cook has said for years and what he said at the announcement in June of the Vision Pro headset is that they expect augmented reality to be as big as the smartphone. Spatial computing is this new third era after personal computing and mobile computing. And so you can bet Apple, although we won't know since we're not inside the company, you can bet Apple has a 10 to 15 year, tentative product roadmap based on everything that all their expertise in supply chain and the fact that they've already spent many, many years prototyping these headsets, so a lot more is coming. And we've just broad stroked in this brief conversation, Frank, what are the possibilities here? And we could certainly talk a lot more, but, I would leave it as an exercise for the reader. If people are interested, there's a lot that you can Google. You can follow me on LinkedIn. There's a lot going on in this space that I think we're going to see a lot more of in 2024.
No, thank you, Neil. Thank you for your time. And I encourage all the members of our network who are viewing this to find you, Neil, on LinkedIn. I definitely want to do this again, my friend. It's so great to connect with you, and the fact that you just by mere coincidence happen to be a New Yorker like myself. Maybe we'll do the next one in person. Again, I appreciate it. Thanks for your time, and I look forward to sharing some future insights with you. I would say next time, maybe a deeper dive just on AR, VR. What do you think? You up for that?
Sounds great, Frank. Always a pleasure.
Same.